It all started when I found a bright pink envelope taped to my front door with the words "Immediate Action Required" written in red marker like it was a ransom note. That was the first sign something was off. The second sign. The signature at the bottom, Priscilla Warden, president of the Oak Ridge Pines HOA. I didn't even live in Oak Ridge Pines. My land borders it, sure, but I've owned this property for 17 years. Built my house myself, paid it off. Nobody tells me what to do on it. I'm Miles Whitaker, 43. Electrician by trade, stubborn by nature. And if there's one thing I don't play with, it's people trying to bully me on my own land. I walked around to the front porch where Priscilla stood, arms crossed, sunglasses on, clipboard clutched like it was a holy relic. She had that look-tight beige cardigan, pearl necklace, and the permanent pout of someone who thought the world owed her a trophy. Mr. Whitaker, she said, like she was trying to sound polite but hated every syllable, you've been sent multiple notices about this violation. What violation? I asked, already annoyed. She tapped her clipboard. You erected a shed without prior approval from the HOA Architectural Committee. That violates Article 12, Section 4 of the Oak Ridge Pines Covenant. That's cute, I replied, but I'm not in Oak Ridge Pines. My property line ends 100 feet before your subdivision starts. You've got no authority here. Priscilla's jaw twitched. Sir, the shed is visible from the community entrance. It affects aesthetic continuity. I nearly laughed. That's not a real law. It's a real fine, she snapped, pulling out a carbon copy of a handwritten form. You owe $250. I need you to sign here acknowledging the violation. I stared at her like she'd just asked me to sign over my kidneys. Not happening. She narrowed her eyes, lips pursed. Are you refusing to comply? Yep. She yanked out her phone. Then I'll let the police handle it. Go ahead, I said, folding my arms. Can't wait. 10 minutes later, a cruiser pulled up. Officer Ramirez stepped out, tall guy, cool demeanor. We'd met a few times before when he needed help with some wiring at his mom's place. Good man. Priscilla rushed up to him like she'd found her savior. Thank God. Officer, I need you to issue a citation. This man is in violation of HOA regulations and is refusing to acknowledge his fine. Ramirez looked at her, then over at me. You said HOA violation? Yes, she said, thrusting the clipboard at him. This structure is unauthorized. Ramirez looked down at the fine, then back at me. Miles, this your property, every inch, I said, surveyed and recorded, not a part of the HOA. Never has been. Priscilla stepped forward. But the shed, ma'am, Ramirez interrupted, unless Mr. Whitaker's property falls under your jurisdiction, you can't issue him a fine. This is private land, not subject to HOA bylaws. But the shed is unsightly, she barked. It lowers the value of homes in Oak Ridge Pines, Ramirez raised an eyebrow. Then maybe Oak Ridge Pines should plant taller trees. I couldn't help but grin, she scoffed, clearly flustered. He's being defiant, Ramirez turned to me. You want to press harassment charges? I shook my head. Not yet, but if she steps foot on my land again, we'll talk. Priscilla's face went pale. This isn't over. Oh, I think it is, Ramirez said, getting back in his cruiser. Next time, call someone else's department. She stormed off, heels clacking like gunshots against my driveway. I thought it was finished, but the next morning I woke up to find a new envelope. This time it wasn't pink, it was legal looking. And Priscilla's name wasn't the only one on it. It was signed by the entire HOA board. They were trying to annex my land. The envelope was thick, legal brief thick, and stamped with the seal of a local law firm I recognized from one of those highway billboards. Baxter, Griggs, and Halloway Real Property Experts. I flipped through the pages on my kitchen table, coffee going cold as I read their letterhead threats. Apparently, the Oak Ridge Pines HOA had filed a petition with the county to re-examine jurisdictional boundaries due to a clerical error in the original subdivision filings. According to them, my property was erroneously omitted from the HOA's governing map, and they were requesting that the county correct the oversight retroactively. It was a bold move, one that would have gone unnoticed if I wasn't someone who read everything carefully. The kicker. They had submitted a revised plat map that conveniently redrew the neighborhood limits to include my land. No hearing scheduled, no notice required, just quiet paperwork filed under the radar. I didn't just own this land, I knew its history. The original parcel went back to 1974, long before Oak Ridge Pines even existed. I had the survey markers, the title, and the original deed stored in a fireproof case in my basement. And now, some HOA board thought they could rewrite 40 years of property law with a couple of forged signatures and a highlighter. I wasn't going to let that happen. I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Darius Cole. We served together in the National Guard. Now, he was a real estate attorney who had a reputation for dismantling HOA cases like a mechanic, tearing down a busted engine. "You free today?" I asked. "If it involves HOA nonsense and a pot of strong coffee, I'll cancel my lunch plans." By 2 o'clock, he was sitting at my table sorting through the documents with surgical focus. "They're not just bluffing, Miles," he said, flipping to a notarized declaration signed by the HOA president and 2 board members. "They submitted this under penalty of perjury. If we find even one false statement in here, we're looking at fraud, not just harassment." I pointed to a line that caught my attention. "What about this part, where they claim I've been using shared HOA-maintained infrastructure?" "That's interesting," Darius muttered. "They're trying to argue that your driveway connects to their private roads, which it doesn't. I connect to Old Quarry Road, county maintained." "Exactly. So if they're asserting otherwise in a legal document, that's not a mistake. That's intentional misrepresentation." That night, we pulled the original subdivision filings from the county clerk's online archives. Sure enough, my lot was explicitly excluded from the Oak Ridge Pines development. The borders stopped well before my fence line, and even their own covenants showed no overlap. Darius drafted a cease and desist that same night, but it didn't end there. The next morning, I noticed a crew of landscapers unloading bags of mulch across the access trail that ran behind my property. I didn't think much of it until I realized they were stacking railroad ties across my fence gate, blocking it completely. "Hey," I shouted, walking over. "Who told you to do that?" The crew leader looked up from his clipboard. "HOA directive said this trail's being converted into a greenway." "No private access allowed." I stared at him. "That's my gate, on my land," he shrugged. "Talk to the HOA, man, we're just doing what we're paid for." I didn't wait. I marched straight down to the HOA's clubhouse, which looked more like a country club than a neighborhood office. Inside, I found Priscilla sitting behind a glass desk, sipping cucumber water like she was running a spa. "You're trespassing," she said without looking up. "You're ordering construction on land that doesn't belong to you." She finally looked at me, face composed like she'd rehearsed for this. "You'll want to take that up with our attorneys." "Already did, and you're in deep now." She leaned back in her chair. "We're merely enforcing our rights under the revised plat." "You mean the one you forged?" Her smile twitched. "That's a serious accusation. I'll let the county decide how serious it is." That night, I installed 3 trail cameras and a spotlight over my back fence. I wasn't taking any more chances. 2 days later, one of the cameras caught 2 board members, Rick Tallow and Denise Harmon, cutting through my yard with marking paint and measuring tape. They weren't even subtle about it. I handed the footage over to Darius, who added trespassing and attempted encroachment to the growing list of complaints. Then came the leak. A neighbor I barely knew knocked on my door that Saturday, Greg Halston, an older guy with a bad knee and a sharper memory. He handed me a flash drive. "You didn't get this from me," he said, "but my wife's on the HOA board." She left her laptop open. I plugged it in and opened a folder titled Annex Strategy. Inside were meeting minutes, emails, and even a draft press release bragging about reclaiming illegitimately held property to boost home values. One message from Priscilla read, If we can get this passed, we'll have leverage to control the ridgeline. No more eyesore sheds or DIY projects. Uniformity matters. That was the angle. Control. They weren't after my land because they needed it. They wanted to silence the visibility of anything that didn't match their manicured vision of suburban perfection. We brought everything to the county recorder and filed a formal complaint. Within 3 days, the revised plat map was flagged for investigation and a hearing was scheduled. But Darius wasn't done. He contacted the district attorney's office and handed over the forged documents, the surveillance footage, and the internal emails. An investigator was assigned. By the following week, 2 sheriff's deputies showed up at the HOA clubhouse with a warrant. They walked out with hard drives, filing boxes, and a very stunned-looking Priscilla in handcuffs. The next HOA meeting was held in the parking lot because the clubhouse was sealed as evidence. Residents gathered, confused and angry. One by one, they turned to me for answers. I didn't gloat. I held up the documents, the emails, and the county maps for all to see. They tried to steal land that never belonged to them. They lied to the county. They lied to you. And they would have gotten away with it if we hadn't paid attention. The crowd murmured, then erupted in questions, some angry, some ashamed. A few board members fled before the meeting ended. The rest resigned in the days that followed. The county dismissed the annexation filing permanently. The DA filed formal charges against Priscilla and 2 others for falsifying public records and attempting to defraud a government agency. I took down the trail cameras the next week, not because I felt safe, but because I knew they'd never try something like that again. The day after the HOA board collapsed like a poorly built gazebo in a windstorm, I found myself at the county courthouse, not because I was in trouble, but because Darius had requested a certified copy of the investigative findings. He said it was always smart to have a paper trail when dealing with people who thought they were above the law. The clerk handed over a folder with a red, confidential stamp on the front and a sticky note attached. Per your request includes recorded testimony and digital copy of seized files. I tucked it under my arm and walked out into the sunlight, feeling like I'd just been handed the last puzzle piece. By the time I got back home, the neighborhood was already buzzing. News had spread that the HOA's financial records had been subpoenaed by the county comptroller's office. Turns out, the annexation plot wasn't even the worst of it. According to the investigators' preliminary findings, Priscilla and her inner circle had been funneling HOA funds into a beautification reserve that conveniently paid out to a landscaping company operated by her nephew. Over $70,000 in 2 years, with no record of competitive bids or resident approval. Darius called me that evening with a tone I hadn't heard from him since deployment. They've got wire fraud, misuse of public funds, and a falsified municipal boundary request. The DA's office is building a case for conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. And Miles, they're digging deeper. I leaned against the porch railing, watching Greg Halston's wife cart boxes out of her garage. She didn't even look up when I waved. What do you mean, deeper? Someone tipped off a local reporter. Now the county's auditing every HOA in the district. Oak Ridge Pines was just the first domino. The next morning brought a new visitor. This time, it wasn't a board member or a nosy neighbor, it was a federal postal inspector. Badge out, business casual, and all business. He introduced himself as Agent Reeves and said he had questions related to mail fraud. Your name came up in a complaint, he said, flipping open a small notepad. Did you receive any official-looking correspondence from the HOA that indicated legal consequences or fines? I nodded. Got a couple. One was hand-delivered. Another came in a legal envelope with a return address from Baxter, Griggs, and Halloway. He jotted something down. We believe the HOA may have misrepresented certain documents as legally binding when they weren't. That's federal territory. If they used the mail system to deliver fraudulent legal threats, they've committed a felony. I showed him the envelope I'd kept, still clipped to my fridge with a magnet shaped like a wrench. He took a photo, bagged it in a clear evidence sleeve, and thanked me. "They've got no idea how much trouble they're in," he said before leaving. By the following week, the local paper ran a front-page article titled HOA Horror, Oak Ridge Pines Board under investigation for felony fraud. It wasn't subtle. They'd gotten hold of the leaked emails, the landscaping payments, and even a voice memo Priscilla had left for a board member, complaining that residents like Miles make the neighborhood harder to control. The last word caught everyone's attention: control. That's when the residents turned. Not just against Priscilla and her cronies, but against the entire system they'd blindly trusted. Yard signs popped up overnight. "No more dictatorship. Reclaim our neighborhood," and in one case, "Shed happens, deal with it." The interim board, a group of 3 residents who had no interest in politics until now, called a town hall meeting at the community center. I was invited, reluctantly at first, but by the time I walked in, the room erupted in applause. A younger resident named Vanessa, who ran a local bakery and had been fined previously for putting up a seasonal flag, stood up. "We owe you an apology, Miles." Most of us stayed quiet because we thought the rules were fair, but none of us realized how far they were willing to go. I shrugged. "You don't owe me anything. Just make sure it doesn't happen again." That night I spoke for the first time in front of a crowd larger than a family reunion. I laid out what I'd found, how Darius had helped, how the cameras had caught the board red-handed, and how the forged documents nearly landed me in a legal nightmare. I didn't dramatize it. I let the facts speak. Afterward, residents lined up to ask questions. Not about me, but about how to fix the system. "Can we dissolve the HOA entirely?" someone asked. Darius, sitting in the back with a coffee cup balanced on his knee, stood up. "Depends on your bylaws. Some HOAs have termination clauses, others require a supermajority vote. But with this level of scandal, you've got more than enough grounds to overhaul everything." Over the next month, that's exactly what they did. The community voted to suspend all enforcement actions pending a full audit. They replaced the HOA's management company. They rewrote sections of the covenant, stripping the board of discretionary power and requiring a public vote for any fines over $50. Meanwhile, Priscilla's trial date was announced. She was facing a laundry list of charges: fraudulent misrepresentation, wire fraud, misuse of funds, and obstruction of justice. The prosecutor's office hinted at a possible plea deal, but residents submitted a petition asking that she serve time. The final blow came when the county clerk's office released the full annexation fraud report. It included a notarized statement from a former board member, admitting that Priscilla had ordered the redrawing of the plat map knowing full well it was illegal. That wasn't just fraud. That was attempted land theft. I heard from Agent Reeves again. He confirmed that the postal fraud charges had been greenlit and would likely be added to the federal case. "I've been doing this 15 years, he said. "Never seen an HOA this bold. Thought they could rewrite property law with a highlighter and a fake letterhead." I chuckled. "Guess they forgot some people read the fine print." With the HOA dismantled and the fraud exposed, my property became something of a symbol in the neighborhood, a quiet reminder that pushback matters. Greg started calling it the Resistance Shed. I didn't love that name, but I let it stick. The shed itself. Still standing. I added a coat of forest green paint, not to blend in, but to stand out just enough. The new board asked if I'd consider advising them as they rebuilt the charter. I said I'd think about it. Not because I wanted the power, because I wanted to make sure no one ever sat behind a clipboard thinking they could rewrite someone's life with a ballpoint pen. One morning, I found a handmade thank you card in my mailbox. No postage, just tucked inside. It had about 20 signatures from neighbors, some I hadn't even met yet. Inside was a gift card to the hardware store and a note that read, "For the guy who reminded us that owning land means something, thanks for fighting back." I kept it pinned above my workbench. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. It only takes one person to stop a bulldozer. You just have to plant your feet and say, "Not here, not today." And if someone tries again, I've still got the cameras. By the end of spring, the Oak Ridge Pines subdivision no longer had a functioning HOA board. The clubhouse had been seized under a civil forfeiture clause, and 3 homes formerly owned by board members were listed for sale. The community, once stiff with rules about lawn edge symmetry and mailbox paint codes, now buzzed with actual conversation, neighbors talking over fences, kids playing in front yards without parents peering through blinds fearing citations. But the real closure came from what happened not in the neighborhood, but in court. Darius called me on a Thursday morning with a voice that was sharper than usual. "They've set the trial date, and there's more. The state attorney's office has added a charge of attempted unlawful property seizure under color of authority. That's a second-degree felony." I paused mid-step in my garage. That's not just a slap on the wrist. No, it's not, and the judge overseeing it, Judge Lafton. He's known for hating abuse of power. I'd be surprised if they walk with anything less than a conviction. I knew the name. Lafton didn't tolerate manipulation, especially not from organizations pretending to be official government entities. And that's exactly how Priscilla and her board had operated. Their entire scheme hinged on the illusion of authority, fake legal threats, forged maps, and pressure tactics dressed up in bureaucratic wording. 1 week before the trial, I was subpoenaed as a witness. Darius wasn't just my friend anymore. He was the assistant counsel for the prosecution, working under the state's lead attorney. When I sat down with them to prep, they already had a thick binder of evidence. "We're not just going after a fine," the prosecutor told me. "We're making an example out of them. What they did, it undermines trust in homeowner associations across the state. If this becomes a precedent, we'll see a ripple effect." I flipped through the binder. 1 page had a transcript from a deposition by Denise Harmon, the former secretary. She'd taken a deal, testified that Priscilla had held late-night meetings to discuss how to reclaim edge properties for the HOA's benefit. Denise admitted she'd been promised a share of the increased assessment revenue if they succeeded. It wasn't just a power play. It was a money grab. The courtroom was packed the morning of the trial. Local news vans were parked outside. A few seats were filled by residents from other HOAs who'd caught wind of the case and wanted to see the fallout. Priscilla sat at the defense table in a navy dress, hair drawn back, face unreadable. She didn't look over at me once. The prosecution's opening statement was simple. "This is a case about people who thought they could counterfeit authority, twist the law to their liking, and intimidate a citizen into surrendering his rights. But the law doesn't bend for convenience, and it doesn't protect liars." The defense tried to spin the story, claimed it was a misunderstanding, that the board had been misled by faulty records. But they couldn't explain the forged plat map, or the emails where Priscilla explicitly told board members to keep the annexation quiet until it's on paper. When it was my turn on the stand, I was asked to recount the day she left the pink notice, the fake fine, and her attempt to block off my fence gate with railroad ties. I stuck to facts, no embellishments, just what happened and what I saw. The defense tried to rattle me. "Mr. Whitaker, isn't it true that your shed was visible from Oak Ridge Pines?" "Yes. And you were aware that it didn't match the architectural aesthetics of their homes." "I was also aware that it was on my own land." Visibility doesn't equal ownership. Did you ever consider modifying your design to reduce conflict? I considered not being bullied. That option seemed more appropriate. They didn't ask me anything after that. The most damning piece of evidence came from a hard drive recovered from the HOA's treasurer. It contained a spreadsheet titled Post-Annexation Revenue Projections. It listed future fines, adjusted property tax estimates, and a column labeled Board Discretionary Fund. That spreadsheet alone sealed their fate. The jury barely took 4 hours to deliberate. They returned with unanimous guilty verdicts on 5 counts. conspiracy to commit fraud, unlawful attempt to seize property, mail fraud, falsification of public records, and criminal misrepresentation under civil authority. Judge Lafton's sentence was swift. Priscilla was given 4 years in state prison, plus restitution to the community and a permanent ban from serving on any HOA nonprofit board or civic committee. 2 other board members received 18 months each, with probation and community service. But that wasn't the real end of it. In the weeks that followed, the state legislature quietly drafted a new bill. It was called the Property Rights Clarification Act, and it required all HOAs to publicly file their jurisdictional maps with county clerks annually. It also mandated that any attempt to alter those boundaries be subject to a public hearing with property owners notified 30 days in advance. The bill passed with overwhelming support. Even HOA lobbyists couldn't defend what Oak Ridge Pines had done. I went back to my quiet life. The cameras stayed down. The lights over the back gate now pointed at my garden beds instead. I expanded the shed a bit not because I needed the space, but because I could. Greg swung by one evening with a 6-pack and a story. You know that guy from Willow Trace. Their HOA tried to fine him for parking his fishing boat in his own driveway. He printed out your court transcript and taped it to the notice. They backed off the same day. I laughed. Guess my shed became a case study. He took a sip of his beer. You realize you did more than stop them. You pulled the curtain back. People don't forget that. I didn't need credit. I didn't want a plaque, but I did keep one thing, the forged plat map. Framed it, actually. Hung it in my garage next to the original survey. Not as a trophy, but a reminder of how close they came to stealing something I'd built with my own hands, and how quickly it unraveled because I said no, not loudly. Not violently, just clearly, and often enough that someone listened.